Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. It is Thursday, September 17th, 2015. Tonight's webinar really comes from a place of the first thing that I learned about students, about young people, after I became a wilderness therapist in 1996. And that was that they're much more resilient. I've told this many times. They're much more resilient than they or their parents have been convinced that they are. And I've seen that repeated, that lesson repeated over and over again throughout these years that I've been doing it. To watch these young people, adolescents and young adults, go through a process where they begin to access their resources, where they begin to learn how to feel, learn how to deal with difficulty and challenges to overcome things, has been a remarkable experience. So tonight I want to talk about what I think are the mechanisms, what I think are the things that cause or create resiliency in young people in development. And some of those things I think can be really helpful for as a parent. As a parent, can be helpful because you can do something. You can make a pretty significant contribution to resiliency in children. Now we know that there is the given. There's the given, and then there's the made. You know what we're given with organically. We all come in with various capacities, various levels of capacities, and so that's just what it is. But still, within that context, there's still some variation that we can become a part of facilitating and helping in the process. Let's talk about first what resiliency is. It's flexibility, the ability to adapt, to allow for changes in your environment, for transitions, for difficulties, for barriers to crop up in your life, and the ability to be flexible around those and not have rigid responses. It's a kind of a plasticity, an ability to bend without breaking, to think in the gray area, or to not live on the extremes. You, like I said before, one of the things that I would describe as resilient is you're resourceful. And what I've seen as parents go through some of this process is as they allow their children, or really require their children, because of the intervention, to access their resources, that they dig deeper, that they become more capable of doing it. I like to use this phrase sometimes when I'm talking with parents and children about this idea of parents keeping their children small, right? When we overfunction, when we don't allow them to hurt or to struggle, mainly because of our empathic discomfort, right? Or our over identification with them, or our lack of valuing the struggle or the difficulty. So, allowing them or requiring them to access their resources is an important part of resiliency. You're less prone, you don't need symptoms to communicate or express your feelings, your difficulties, your struggles, right? That's really what symptoms are. They're this kind of leakage, this sideways expression or backwards expression of our pain and of our discomfort in life. The difference between internal locus of control and external locus of control, I think, is relevant here. And this is to say, and we've seen this in our research, we've seen a dramatic improvement with participants moving from external locus of control, that is, what happens to me determines my fate, determines my quality of life, versus what choices I make, what I do creates my happiness or unhappiness to a large extent. So moving from externally focused on what can make us happy or unhappy to internally taking that ownership back, becoming more, feeling empowered, becoming powerful, not helpless. That's the next word, is the sense of empowerment versus helpless or powerless. And I'm not talking about the spiritual kind of powerless that we get to oftentimes when we feel like we're trying too hard to control everything, and we realize that we have to surrender and trust and rely on other people and ask for help and really access our humility. I'm talking about the powerlessness that says no matter what I do, it won't make a difference. It won't make a difference about my happiness. It won't make a difference about my life satisfaction. You're able to advocate for yourself in order to access accommodations. I see that a lot with families. I see that in my own family, that it's important to, when a child is struggling, to have a discussion with them, to ask, to encourage, to back off enough so that they can begin to ask for help from people that they need help. I've seen this before where children will write home asking their parents for things like sunscreen or lip balm, right? When on the other side of it, we actually require them to apply sunscreen during the day. It's an expectation. and lip balm, and we check for dry and chapped skin. But they're so used to being in this dependent relationship, right? There's this secondary gain where everybody feels something warm and fuzzy about a child needing a parent. When really the child can go out there and get it themselves, can ask for it, can advocate for themselves. I've seen so many times children come in with learning disabilities, and they do have them. That's the given. They do have them. And I've seen parents say, they're not going to be able to write a letter of any kind of significance, or they're not going to be able to read, or they're going to have problem during study periods. And although some of those things happen, almost always do they exceed the expectations that the parent has, right? Everybody's become conditioned. This bar has become lowered. And it's not a conscious manipulation in most cases. It's just a exaggerated or an exacerbated learning difference, right? It's connected to esteem, connected to how I feel about myself if I have that, and then not wanting to fail, not wanting to be disappointed, and continually lowering that bar and asking unconsciously for other people to lower that bar so that I don't really realize what I can do. But I've seen children that, for example, are not supposed to be able to write 20-page letters, not supposed to be able to read with any kind of comprehension, and read 10 books while they're with us and comprehend all of it. And that's like I said, the very first lesson, the very first thing I learned about our clients, about our students, was that they're much more resilient than they or their parents thought they were. So how can we help develop, encourage resiliency? Where does it come from? I think this is not necessarily intuitive, and it is so important. It comes from attachment and attunement in at least one adult, one safe and secure and stable adult. And those are, of course, relative terms. But that's where it comes from. If I, as a child, can be seen, if my needs can be responded to, then the world is safe. Then I am okay. If I am overwhelming, if I cause anxiety in my parents, if I cause frustration and exacerbation, and let me say, a lot of our children do, right? A lot of our children do have that effect on their parents. So when I do that, I'm not okay, right? When what I feel, what I think, what I believe, how I behave, when it stresses people out, I'm bad. When people can just see it, when they can replace, this is an important idea, when we can replace as parents our anxiety with our curiosity, right? If I can shift from being worried about you to being curious about how it's going to go for you, right? And there's no judgment in that curiosity, right? And then the interpretation of the child is, I'm okay, I'm tolerable. I don't cause the people who love me the most to be upset or sad or scared or anxious or frustrated. So I'm okay. So the capacity to provide, and this is a clinical term, to provide a container. Not structure. It's not structure. A container is the mind of the therapist in therapy. It's the mind of the parent in parenting. Can I think about my child with love and without judgment, with reduced amounts of anxiety? If I can't, can I go somewhere to get taken care of? Usually it's therapy or 12-step means, can I go somewhere to be fed, to be nourished, to be taken care of, so then I can come back and relate to my child in a way that provides them that sense of they are okay, because I can hold them in my mind without freaking out or becoming upset or frustrated. So connection is, in my opinion, the most, and not even does anything come in a close second to it. In fact, a lot of the other things that I'm going to talk about, where it comes from, they actually have to start with this. Here's a quote from Parenting from the Inside Out related to this attachment and attunement. Research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is very strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life experiences. Research has clearly demonstrated that our children's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened to us when we were young, if we do not come to process and understand those experiences. So the foundation that provides us with the ability, the capacity to be able to hold a child in our mind without panic, without rigidness, without being overwhelmed by them, is if we can deal with our trauma, our context, if we can understand it. And we all experience varying levels of trauma throughout our life. It doesn't have to be big T, gigantic trauma. So, like I said, attachment and attunement. Another thing is that we need to allow for, and this is difficult for all of us, and I'm a dad and I know this, we need to allow for stress to occur. We need to allow for our child to experience frustration, right? Without our intervention, without our making it okay or removing the obstacle. And that becomes the question for all of us, doesn't it? Especially when our children who are in this program push the limits to the extent that these children do. Then it becomes even more confusing, right? How can I provide for autonomy when the behaviors are potentially life-threatening? However, I think a lot of us will use that excuse to intervene, to mingle, to become involved in many areas of our children's life that are not life-threatening. So it's the idea of exposure therapy. I put that in there because that's what it is. It's being exposed to difficult, uncomfortable, stressful situations and learning how to cope. And there's so much value in failing. There's so much value in stumbling and falling and running into a wall, right? You learn things when you run into a wall that you can't learn any other way. You learn what it feels like to run into a wall. And for most of us, we don't run into it just once. We have to run into it 4 or 5 times, 10 or 15 times, just to make sure that it's a wall. So as your children, even in our program and after our program, struggle and go through cycles, it's important for parents to value the struggle. I read a quote today on social media that said, children learn from making choices, not from following orders, right? They learn about life from choices, making choices. That's how they learn. They don't learn from compliance, from doing what they're told necessarily. And so we have to learn how to expand our bandwidth, right? We have to learn to expand our capacity. And that's why that's what we provide for you at Evoke. So much stuff is we want to give you so much support, education, empathy, nurturing, healing, discussion, places to talk about it, so that you are fed, so that you are more, your capacity improves, your bandwidth expands. And then you can respond to your children without the frustration, without the anxiety, without your limitations, because you've expanded them. Children moving through situations that are stressful and as a result improving delay of gratification and frustration tolerance. My dissertation, I refer to this because it's been an interest of mine for many years, is that we looked at different various family processes and rules and roles and struggle. And we looked at children who experienced trauma, one of which was parental alcoholism. We looked at children who experienced trauma, and we looked at all of these kind of potentially mitigating variables. And then we looked at the quality of their relationships as young adults. And what we found was that the most powerful effect was if the child identified being seen, heard, and understood by at least one stable adult during their childhood, that they had a much greater chance of not having the trauma affect them in their current day relationships, right? And what that could do for a lot of you, it can give you hope, because not all of the adults in your child's life are going to be stable, are going to have the capacity to see them, to understand with them, to resonate with them, right? Not all of the adults in their life are going to do enough of their own work, as you know, that they're going to be able to provide this kind of container that I'm describing. But if one person does, it can make a difference. It improves their ability to communicate. They have less conflictual relationships, we found. They were more capable of conflict resolution with their partners. And there were other variables that we studied, but that's a summary. Psychoeducation in the context of processing grief, stressors, or trauma. So part of what can create resiliency is information, education, right? Therapy is not psychoeducation, right? It's not about, this is not therapy. My book is not therapy. Therapy is the experience of walking into an office and having to discuss very difficult things, which are really just you, your truth, who you are, what you feel, what you think. Taking the risk of judgment, taking the risk of rejection, because in our lives we learned as children that certain things that we felt, thought, did were not acceptable and could potentially result in us being alone or alienated or rejected or dismissed. So to walk into a therapy session and to begin to take off your metaphorical clothes, your layers of the onion, right? Viktor Frankl said therapy, generally speaking, is where you go to a place and you have to hear some difficult things. An analysis, he said, is a place that you go to and you have to say difficult things. In my opinion, both are therapy, right? And with my clients in therapy, it's not so much about the information and stories that I share. It's about them taking the risk every day that I could potentially react like those of their childhood. So psychoeducation can help and assist. It can give us information. It can help us make meaning. It can help us reinterpret. People say to me all the time, you can't change the past. Of course you can, right? We change our past stories all the time. The way I looked at a particular trauma when I was 16 years old that I experienced, I look at it so completely differently now than I did when I was 35 or 25 or 18 or 16. And so part of it is information. Part of it is about awareness. And then learning to feel. And again, this is hard work. It's simple in some ways, but it's hard work. And the way we can teach our children how to feel is let it be okay. We need to stop trying to get them to feel certain things or not feel certain things. We need to stop walking on eggshells because they're fragile. We need to stop over functioning in the relationship because I know how it's going to feel if I ask you for help or if I tell you something or if I share something. And I'm not talking about becoming invasive, shaming. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just learning that it's okay to feel. So when a child says, I don't like it, we say, thanks for telling me. When the child says, I don't like you, we say, thank you for telling me. Right? Instead of trying to explain them out of their feeling. So learning to provide a mirror, unencumbered by our own shame, by our own fear, by our own anxiety, by our own fantasies of rejection, right? We fantasize about being rejected by our children as if that needs to be considered. That's not their job. Right? That was our parents' job. Right? But our children's job isn't to accept us. Right? That's not their burden to carry. What are the barriers? One of the barriers can be praise, right? We think that praise, we equate it to self-esteem sometimes. We equate it to strength sometimes. If we can praise our child into feeling good about themselves, right? But our child can sense our anxiety and also can sense the tenuousness of praise. And this is a powerful lesson from the book Nurture Shock. Bronson and Merriman actually referred to the inverse power of praise. This idea of telling our child they're special. Sure, he's special. But new research suggests that if you tell him that, you'll ruin him. It's a neurobiological fact. What they ask us to do is shift our praise from gifted, you have so much potential, you're so amazing, to praising things over which they have control. Emphasizing effort, for example, gives the child a variable that they can control. They come to see themselves as in control of their success. Emphasizing natural intelligence takes it out of the child's control and provides no good recipe for responding to a failure. What happens when children's potential or giftedness gets praised is they seek tasks that are easier, they are more likely to cheat or take a shortcut, and they won't take risks, right? All the things that we want them to be able to do, they're going to avoid because the potential loss of that place on the pedestal in your mind is devastating. And because we confuse praise with affection and love, right? It's especially threatening to a child to lose that. So I would rather cheat. I'd rather quit than fail. Because that's less frightening, less scary. Then at least I can be in control of it. So shifting our praise, it's a really, I think it's incredibly important to eradicate for most of us the phrase, I'm proud of you. I think that's important. Because first of all, it's not your job to make me proud. Right? It's not. As a parent. And so if you fail or struggle at something, I'm going to be the opposite of proud. If you do something really stupid, I'm going to be the opposite of proud. Right? Instead of just becoming curious, just watching, just seeing, providing structure, setting boundaries in my life and in my home and in the life of my child subsequently. but not heaping on the praise or the disappointment in trying to shape them in that way. Especially because so much of that is our own reflection and projection, right? It's like it's about us. In the book, Bronson Merriman say that it's almost when the parent is praising a child, it's almost the equivalent of them praising themselves. I was explaining this to a young adult about he trying to teach some of this, telling him as a therapist, I didn't necessarily need or have those kind of judgments about him, and he wasn't buying it. And he said to me, I'm sure you would be proud if your daughter got into Harvard. And I said, it would be irrelevant to me. If that's something she worked for and wanted to do and it was a goal, I'd be happy for her that she accomplished something challenging and difficult like that. But I don't have an instinct to be disappointed in her if she goes to a community college. Now, do I have shame? Right? Do I worry about what people think, which has nothing to do with my child's development and welfare? Yes, I do. When my children do dumb things, when they throw a tantrum in the grocery store, when my son gets arrested, right? Do I sometimes worry what people are going to think about me when I talk about the school that my child may or may not be going to? Yes, that's all true because that's my stuff and that's my work and that's my project. But I got to go to therapy and manage that, right? I'm not going to work that out ideally in the relationship with my child. Other barriers, our protection. I call it our empathic misery at times. Right? There's a lot of things that we end up doing to protect them, to protect us. In a book, in some recent research in the book Top Dog, Bronson and Merriman, the same authors as Nurture Shock, shows that exposure to stress within a certain limit, the brain learns to accommodate and create resourceful connections, allowing for improved performance. And sometimes as parents, we're just so torn by our own shame, by our own background, by our own over-identification, by all of our projections, by our empathic misery, that we want to protect our children from suffering and struggle. And I can't tell you how many parents can identify with that and can say, I overcame great things to be a self-made person, overcame great difficulties, and then I do that too. We then have this insane idea that we try to remove those barriers. I love this cartoon because I think it talks about some changes in our culture, right? Neither one of these is necessarily ideal, but there is this shift, right? There is this shift. And in both cases, the parent isn't resonating with the child. And neither one of these versions is good for child development. External locus of control, right? We look for people to change so that we'll be okay. We look for things to change. We blame our serenity on our circumstances, right? If only my alcoholic husband would stop drinking. If only my drug addicted son would stop using. If only my depressed wife would stop being depressed, then I would be okay. Right? We talk about and define our success by the outside. We don't see, we need to be good. This is the greatest barrier that I know. We need to be good. And because we need to be good, and because being anything other than good is so threatening to us, it's such a dread to us that we see badness out there. And we don't understand that the battle is going on in here, right? We don't understand that. So we see that the fight between us and others, the fight is always inside of ourselves. And there really is no out there. There really is no badness. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, I would rather be whole than good. That's integrated. That's understanding that I can make a difference. That being kind is its own reward, right? Loving is what makes me happy, right? These are things that I can control. I can learn to be kind. I can learn to be loving. But I can't control what other people do to me. Behaviors that are fueled by parental anxiety and guilt. I've told this story before, but I remember in undergraduate school, actually, where we were looking at this model of different styles of parenting and family systems. And then we turned the page. And the next drawing, the next thing, they overlay anxiety on top of it. And they said, if anxiety is prevalent in the family, then the model goes out the window. And I remember thinking, as an undergrad student, what's the big deal with anxiety? Like, I didn't even notice. I didn't even know that I had some. I just thought it was just, it's like I grew up with a back pain. I just thought that everybody had back pain every morning. And then I started to learn that's not true. And anxiety is incredibly detrimental. Gets in the way of our ability to see, to hear, to contain, to respond flexibly, to own our stuff. All that gets in the way of so much, and teaches our children that something's wrong with them. I wrote this quote yesterday on social media that said, "Having faith in our child, having faith in our children, doesn't mean that they're going to turn out like we had hoped. Having faith in our children means that they're going to turn out altogether different than we ever imagined, and it's going to be wonderful." Right? Ideally, our children can push past the limitations that we try to impose on them and grow. And hopefully, as we grow, maybe we can catch up. Maybe we can be a part of it. Maybe we can be in relationship with them. So back to the parental anxiety is restricting. One of the examples that they talk about in Bronson and Merriman is that we have increased recreation. We've replaced hard work in families in some ways, and we've replaced it with recreation. And we think that fun times spent together, right, is going to make the difference and build relationships. It's often in the context of the hard work. That's why wilderness works so well. That's why wilderness works better than programs that appease parental anxiety and guilt about setting a tough boundary and having a tough intervention. Wilderness therapy works better than many of those. Not because it's only better, although I'm a fan, but because if parental anxiety and fear and guilt is not addressed, it's going to continue to be a contributing factor to a deteriorating relationship and dynamic between the parent and the child. And like I said, take this nugget for tonight. Try to replace your anxiety about your child's eventual failing with curiosity. And find places and people that can take care of you and your anxiety, because your child can't. They cannot, and it's not their job. That's why therapists, right, are there. That's why mentors, sponsors are there for us. There's a quote I used to read at the beginning of every parent meeting that I taught in person. There's no question but that our parents failed us as parents. All parents fail their children, and ours were no exception. No parent is ever adequate enough for the job of being a parent, and there's no way not to fail at it. No parent ever has enough love or wisdom or maturity or patience. No parent ever succeeds completely. As kids, we needed more mothering than our mothers could give us, more fathering than our fathers had to offer, more brothering and sistering than we got from our siblings. Part of our task in growing up thus becomes finding our own sources of parenting to add to what our mothers and fathers were not able to give us. We cannot wait for our parents' permission to grow up. We need to decide on our own to find other people to parent us, to find other people to give us what our parents couldn't. To grow up isn't easy, but in order to do that, we must forgive our parents. We must forgive them for our sake, not theirs. When we do not forgive them, we are still expecting all of our parenting from them. We are clinging to them in the hope that if we wait long enough or do enough of the right things or make them feel guilty enough, they will finally come through with enough parenting for us. But this is impossible. And in order for us to be really free to find other sources of parenting, we must forgive. This is the development of later adolescence and young adulthood, right? This is part of what we do with them, right? Yes, we give everybody in the family system support and skill building and tools and new awareness. We do all of that. But if the parent or the child is waiting for the other one to get it perfectly, right, so that they'll be okay, they're never going to be free. So when you think about your child's regression, the most important question is, how am I going to respond to that differently? What resources do I need to access to be able to respond to that in the best way? And the focus becomes so little about their regression and so much more about the thing that you have control over. And it models so much, it models good work for your children. It takes the pressure off of them. It takes the power struggle out of it. It does so many wonderful things. They're not the only patient, the only problem, the only one who's struggling. So we talked about most of these. The last idea is this idea of objectification. We've heard the phrase sexual objectification. We know what that is in our culture. And we hear about that in the news and in social media, and we have for years, right? It's turning another person into a sexual object. No connection, no intimacy, right? But there's this objectification that we do with our children. That most human beings that I work with at any age, I'm helping them to work through this and to break free of this. We all have struggled with it some. And that is that you are the outcome of me. Simply put, you are a reflection of me. Your successes are evidence of me. Your failures are evidence of me. Right? So, and I think of you like I think of a light switch. A light switch has no choice whether to be turned off or on. It just does what we do to it. And that kind of objectification, the hardest thing is, as parents, because we need to be good, because the most important thing in most of our self-esteem is our children and how they turn out in this equation, that we get angry, frustrated, controlling with them instead of seeing them as separate, really seeing them. When you can see somebody and they tell you that you're a piece of garbage, you don't get upset because you're not seeing you in that statement, you're seeing them. Or they tell you that they're angry, or that you don't listen well enough, or that you don't love them, or that you're impatient or too rich. The list could go on. When you can see them in those statements, hear them, empathize with their pain, understand, apologize, acknowledge, when you can do that for them, that's seeing them. When we have a hard time listening to that, right, we're making it about us. So objectification doesn't see the other as individual, doesn't see an other, just sees an extension of us, right? Parents will say to me, well, two of my kids turned out good and one of them turned out like this, this program going in this direction. And I'm curious about that. But ideally, the most connected we can be with our children is when we see them as individuals, separate from us, not a reflection of us. And then we go take care of whatever limitations, whatever holes that all of us are dealing with our therapists, with our mentors, with people that we trust, who can professionally and effectively facilitate a process of healing for us so that we can come back with the utmost compassion. Even if we have come to understand ourselves well, our children will still make their own journey through life. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper understanding, our role as a parent serves to support our child's development, not guarantee its outcome. And there are so many dialectics that we can hold at the same time. And this is one of those, that idea that, right, that you can do the best that you can, and you can also let go of the outcome. And you can be sensitive to your impact of others. There's so many dialectics, and this is a wonderful one. What I wrote in my book when talking about over-identification, what I see most in families is over-identification or over-attachment rather than a lack of attachment. This is what somebody said to me in an in-service. I explained that over-identification is the most severe form of poor attachment. Over-identification doesn't see the child as an other, but rather sees the child as an extension or reflection of the parent. In such a relationship dynamic, there's only one person, the parent. The child is altogether missing in the parent's mind. So if you think over-identifying is loving too much, if you think it's knowing your child better than anybody else, it's not. It's not. It's too close. It's smothering. It's consuming. And the distance that we talk about when we're describing healthy detachment provides the capacity, the foundation for healthy attachment. What they need is they need exposure to stressors, and they need them with competent, connected, nurturing adults. And when they don't have that, when we don't have that, it's hard to grow. And a big part of that is, if I were to attach a skill to being a healthy container, it is listening. Practice listening, get good at it, practice it again and again and again. And I've been studying it for 25 years now in communication theory, and I'm still practicing it. And I still find myself struggling and stumbling at times. Listening is easier than fixing. Fixing is not listening. Fixing models inappropriate psychological boundaries, owners and owning another's feeling. It's not broken in the first place most of the time. And it's none of our business to fix it. Even with our young children. People always ask me, and over these few years I have the luxury of having children in elementary school and children in college. right? 7 to almost 23. And so the application of these principles applies to all four of them, applies to my wife, to my friends, to my employees. It applies to everybody, right? We have this idea that we are terminally unique, right? That our situation, right? My child has autism spectrum disorder. My child's an addict. My child is depressed and cutting on themselves, and my child's an adult. My child's 30. It's the core principles are the same. We can learn to listen. We can learn to see. We can learn to hear. We can learn not to react. When parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent to make a connection to the child's experience without having to deny their feelings. That's not my quote, by the way. I should have put that in quotes. I forgot to. Somebody else said that. It's a powerful idea, that last paragraph. Reminds me, by the way, I think there's some good quotes on this. You can take this slide or always request a copy of these slides by writing webinar at drbradreedy.com. Or if you still have access to the parent portal, you can get the slides by clicking on the link there. Let's go over the take home. Attunement. Listening and emotionally relating. Working out our histories in order to avoid knee-jerk, controlling, or over-identifying behaviors. Beware of rescuing, which really is rescuing nobody. It really is eventually going to feel like smothering and interference. And it's not connection, and it's not too much love. It's a lack of differentiation. It's a lack of connection. It's a lack of attachment. It's abandonment. Understand exposure therapy and the value of the struggle, the value of the difficulty, the value of falling on the ground, running into a wall. Show them how to stuff or fail and value the struggle. Years ago, I haven't told this story in many, many years, but it was a cold, rainy fall day. I was miserable. I couldn't stay warm no matter what I was doing. And I said to the staff member, as I was struggling between sessions to get a fire, and there was too much rain, so the fire kept going out, and I was using my sleeping bag, and I was miserable. And I said to the staff, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk me out of having the rest of the sessions in my car, which is kind of a no-no in wilderness therapy unless it's a lightning storm. And the staff just said to me, Stephen just said, just show them how to suffer. And then I had all the strength that I needed for the rest of the day. I showed them how to go through a difficult time. And I wasn't graceful at it. Allowing them to accessing their own resources, learn to listen better. Everybody on this webinar, including me, needs practice at learning to listen better. Absolutely. And extinguishing dependence. It requires us as parents to be aware of our unconscious need to be needed, to be the expert, to be the parent. Can we let go of that? That is a challenge. If we don't even own that, even if it's only 2% of the equation, we're not providing the ideal kind of dynamic with our child where we're looking at our part of it and talking about our potential influence to be the expert, the answer, the solution. Right? What are we if we're not the fixer? What relationship is there if it's just about connection and sharing experiences, not about fixing? All right, I'm happy to go over any topic-related questions, Stephanie, and then I can go on to non-topic related questions after the rest of the slides. What role does giving our children more material possessions than they really need, that is giving them the same as their peers, have on reducing their resiliency? I came from lower class family and feel not having as much made me a resourceful worker at an early age, and it stuck with me. It seems rare in comparison to many youth today. Your thoughts, please. Absolutely. And again, like other things, we're not seeing the child's need when we're doing it. And I've done it. I've done it and I've observed it in hundreds and thousands of families. And I grew up having very little and had to struggle and had to work many jobs to get through college and get lots of school, all those things, right? All those things. And then I for some reason, make the mistake of trying to give my child something that they don't need and is too much. And I'm not healing or serving or seeing them. I'm doing my own childhood again. I have unsorted out trauma and pain. I have unexpressed grief from my own childhood that I'm not sorting out. And so instead of taking care of that over here, I'm putting that on the child. So I'm not seeing them, number one. Like I said, a lot of these have their foundation and a lack of connection. Right? And I'm trying to make them feel okay because I'm not okay with them not feeling okay because I haven't done my work on my own childhood enough. Period. So I'm trying to cause them to feel maybe it's secure, maybe it's safe because I didn't feel secure and safe as a child when we were struggling. Maybe it's a lack of pain because I haven't sorted through and grieved and felt all my pain. Maybe my frustration was overwhelming for me and for my mother. I haven't sorted that out, so I'm trying to help them not be frustrated. I'm trying to get them to love me, to like me, to be happy. All those things. It's all those things. Absolutely. But it's important that we don't just simply judge it in ourselves and others and say, well, you're spoiling the child. Spoiling the child means that you're not taking care of the child's needs. Right? It's the creation of the narcissistic injury that we're still suffering from, which is why we're doing it again. Love, love, love this Henry Close quote. I have shared it with so many other parents who have their kids struggling at home, as well as kids like mine who went to Second Nature and onto an RTC and now in boarding school. Thank you for sharing it. Absolutely. It's in part of it's in my book, part of it's in Chrissy Positek's book. It's something I found almost 20 years ago and started using in our parent meetings. So, all right, that's all the topic related questions. Don't hang up. Quick announcements. We want you all to go to 6 of these groups at least. Just try 6. If you're in the program, if you're out of the program and you cheated and you skipped them, go back. Follow us on social media. You can look for announcements, articles, pictures, parent meetings coming up, other things. The play that we are helping to support in New York City. You'll find out more about that. We're going to have fundraisers and events with that. We're going to, of course, continue to do parent services and parent report supports groups. My book is on Audible and you can buy it on Amazon. If you go to the Parent Alumni Foundation page, link there, 10% of the Amazon price goes to charity and it costs the same if you go to the normal Amazon page. So it goes to our charity, which is helping people who can't afford treatment get treatment. New York City, September 27th and October 25th, 4 to 6 p.m. Contact Stephanie at evoketherapy.com. It's going to be at the Courtyard Central Park Marriott, where we've had it most of the time over the past year and a half. In Seattle, I'm going to be at the Marriott Bellevue. There's the address there. September 27th, 4 to 6 p.m. So obviously I'm not going to be in New York that same day. That's going to be run by Gregory. And Try to Parent Workshop, October 17th and 18th. We would like every parent that possibly can come to come. If you can coordinate that with a field visit with your therapist, that's fine. And then the last intensive before it turns into winter, the last one that I can guarantee that I'm doing is October 8th through 11th. That's for any adult, young adult, old adult. It doesn't have to be a parenting theme. It can just be about finding yourself, finding a more authentic version of yourself. And you can bring parenting themes there too, but it's for any adult. You can check out our pursuits. That's our high adventure course that we can do for young adults or do custom ones. All right, are there any live questions on any topic, any other topic that came up, Stephanie? We have a son going through a very tough adjustment to college. He's very depressed and away from home. How can you encourage resilience and healthy detachment and feel confident they are safe? It might be hard. It might be hard. And I'm not giving you any one piece of advice about what to do or not do because that has to come from you and it has to be, ultimately it's going to be your decision and you love them more than anybody does. And um, so I don't know to answer a specific situation, but it's important to talk to somebody else. It's important to, I say this all the time. For me, it's important to have a therapist so that you can make sure that you're clear about it, so that you can see where your anxiety ends and providing resources for safety begins. Because that's fuzzy for us because of all of these issues that I've discussed tonight. So if you and I were in a dialogue together, we could walk ourselves through that. And we could start to piece out through what you see, what you share, what your perspective is. We could start to piece together or parse out what is your anxiety, what is your over-identification, and what is your wisdom in providing a resource or something to assist your child. We could do all of that. and eventually we could have a discussion with them too, so they can get more clear about it. So I can't really give something here, but I can say if you're doing this on your own without professional help, that is parenting. Not just parenting kids who are struggling, but if you're doing, I don't know how you're doing it, because I need it. Like I say all the time, same therapist, going close to 17 over 17 years. So go to an Al-Anon meeting, go to a CODA meeting, learn about it, learn where codependency and parenting depart from each other. How do you decide where you do your visits? Would love to come close to Lexington, Kentucky. Just where our larger population of people are at. So I'll have to look at what might be closest to Lexington, Kentucky. I've heard it's one of the states I haven't been in. One of the few states I haven't been in is Kentucky, and I hear it's beautiful there. And by the way, I'll say this: if any of you have a community group, a church group, a school group that you would like me to come and present at, and you can somehow advertise and get a job, I'll do that too. Any city in the country, especially with the book. Still waiting for Houston. I know that I dropped that ball, didn't I? I dropped that ball. If you were the one talking to me about it, write me and see if we can re-engage that, because we ran into a couple of obstacles. All right, next webinar is on guilt and shame, one of my favorite topics. Tuesday the 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So I'll talk to you all, those of you who come back, 6:30 p.m. next Tuesday evening. Have a great weekend and take care. I hope this is helpful. Bye-bye.